The letter was folded into fourths, yellowed at the edges, and tucked inside the lining of a suitcase my daughter bought for $12 at an estate sale. At first, I thought it was just another old paper, something sentimental maybe, a grocery list, a love note, a receipt from a life that had already ended. But then I saw my late husband's name. Not just his name, his signature. And beneath it, in careful blue ink, a sentence that made the room tilt quietly around me. If anything happens to me, do not trust my brother with Nora or the house. I remember my daughter standing across the kitchen table, still wearing her college sweatshirt, her hand over her mouth. The little brass suitcase latches were open between us, like a mouth that had finally decided to speak. For 9 years, I had believed my husband, Daniel, left us with debts, confusion, and an old family house that somehow slipped away in probate. For 9 years, I believed grief had simply made me bad at paperwork. For 9 years, I let polite men in pressed suits explain my own life to me, until I stopped asking questions. That letter changed everything. Because inside that suitcase was not only Daniel's warning, there was a bank key, 3 faded photographs, and a copy of a trust document I had never seen. And by midnight, I had 3 questions I could not put down. Why had my husband hidden a letter in a suitcase that was not ours? Why had his brother told me the trust had never existed? And why, 2 hours after my daughter found it, did that same brother call me and say, in the calmest voice I had ever heard, "Nora, whatever you found, let's handle it privately." Good day, dear listeners. It's Nora again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Nora Whitaker. I was 52 years old when this happened, a high school history teacher in Columbus, Ohio, and for most of my adult life I believed that truth was not a dramatic thing. Truth was patient. Truth waited in records, in dates, in signatures, in the small contradictions people overlooked because they were too busy listening to whoever spoke the loudest. In my classroom, I taught students to ask who wrote the document, who benefited from the story, and what was missing from the page. I told them history was not only wars and presidents. Sometimes history was a receipt in a drawer. Sometimes it was a woman's name crossed off a deed. Sometimes it was a letter no one wanted found. I never imagined I would have to teach that lesson to myself. My life before the suitcase was quiet in the way middle-class widowhood can be quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but organized. I lived in a small rented duplex with cream siding and a porch light that flickered whenever it rained. I drove a 6-year-old Toyota with a cracked cup holder. I graded essays at my kitchen table, bought store-brand coffee, and kept a calendar on the refrigerator with my daughter Elise's college schedule written in green marker. Daniel had been gone 9 years by then. He died of a sudden aneurysm at 48 while fixing a loose gutter on our old house. There was no long illness, no chance to prepare, no final conversation where he handed me a folder and said, "Here is everything you will need." There was only the phone call, then the funeral, then paperwork. I was 43, newly widowed, with a 13-year-old daughter who slept with the hallway light on for months. Daniel's family had always been complicated. Old Columbus money, though not the glamorous kind. His grandfather owned several small warehouses and a row of rental properties near the river before the city became fashionable. By the time I married Daniel, most of that wealth had thinned out into stories, disputes, and a few properties nobody agreed on. Daniel never cared much for the family money. He was a civil engineer, practical and modest. He loved maps, old bridges, and making pancakes on Sundays. His older brother Martin was different. Martin was an attorney who wore charcoal suits even to backyard cookouts. He spoke softly, remembered everyone's birthday, and had the gift of making a suggestion feel like a favor you were foolish to refuse. After Daniel died, Martin became very present. He helped with the funeral home. He spoke to the bank. He found the insurance forms. He told me probate would be complicated but manageable if I let him shield me from the worst of it. At the time, I was grateful. Grief made my mind feel like a classroom after the final bell. Papers everywhere, chairs crooked, chalk dust hanging in the air. Martin seemed orderly. He had folders. He had answers. And when you are drowning, a calm voice can sound like a lifeboat. The old Whitaker house was the only thing I questioned. Daniel and I had lived there for 16 years. It was a sturdy brick house with deep windowsills, a narrow attic stair, and a backyard maple tree Elise used to call her castle. Daniel had told me more than once that the house was protected in a family trust, and that if anything happened to him, Elise and I would always have a place there. But after his death, Martin said Daniel had misunderstood. There was talk of a trust, he told me in my kitchen one grey afternoon, sliding papers from a leather folder, but it was never properly funded. The house remained tied to family liabilities. I'm sorry, Nora. I know what Daniel believed, but belief and legal standing are not the same thing. I remember staring at him while my coffee went cold. Daniel said Elise and I were safe there. Martin's face softened, but not his eyes. I know he wanted that. But wanting something does not make it enforceable. That was the first sentence I should have written down. Instead, I signed where he pointed. I was a teacher, not a lawyer. I knew primary sources and reconstruction amendments, not probate filings and trust funding. The house was sold 18 months later to pay what Martin called family obligations. Elise and I moved into the duplex. Martin said he had managed to keep us from being personally responsible for larger debts. He made it sound like rescue. And maybe I wanted to believe that. Belief can be a soft blanket when the truth is too cold to touch. The first warning sign came 3 years after Daniel died, though I did not recognize it then. I received a property tax notice, addressed to Nora Whitaker, beneficiary. It listed the old house's parcel number. I called Martin's office immediately. His assistant said he was in court. 2 hours later, Martin called me himself. It's clerical, he said. County records are notoriously slow. But why would it say beneficiary? A small pause. Not long. Just enough for a careful person to notice. Because your name was connected to preliminary estate planning documents years ago. It means nothing now. I accepted that answer, because I was tired. Teachers know this feeling. You catch an error in a student's essay, but it is late, you have 30 more papers to grade, and part of you thinks, I will come back to it tomorrow. I did not come back to it. Then came the strange bank statement. It arrived with no account number visible except the last 4 digits. It was addressed to Daniel Whitaker Trust, care of Martin Whitaker. But somehow my duplex address was listed beneath it. I opened it because my name was on the forwarding sticker. There was no balance, only a notice about inactive account verification. When I called the bank, the woman on the phone became careful. Ma'am, I can't discuss this account without proper authority. I'm Daniel Whitaker's widow, I said. I understand, but this account appears to have trust restrictions. What trust? I'm sorry, you'll need to speak with the trustee. When I told Martin, he laughed gently. Not loudly. Martin never laughed loudly. Nora, these institutions generate automated notices from old data. I'll handle it. Why is there still a trust account? Because closing old estate accounts is slower than you think. And why am I not allowed to ask about it? His tone cooled by 1 degree. You are allowed to ask, but asking the wrong department can create confusion, and confusion creates legal expense. That was how Martin controlled people. Not with threats, with the suggestion that your curiosity would cost you money. I stopped asking. Years passed. Elise grew taller, then independent. She earned a partial scholarship to Ohio State and studied environmental policy. I kept teaching. I kept paying rent. I kept a small framed photo of Daniel on my bookshelf, beside a ceramic apple a student gave me in 2007. Life did not become easy, but it became survivable. Then, in late October, Elise came home for a weekend and asked if I wanted to go with her to an estate sale. I need a side table, she said. Something cheap, but not ugly. That was how the whole truth entered my life, not through a courthouse, not through a bank vault, through a daughter looking for furniture. The estate sale was in an old neighborhood north of downtown, in a house that smelled of dust, cedar, and lemon furniture polish. Everything had little white price stickers, china plates, lamps, boxes of Christmas ornaments, books with cracked spines. Elise found no side table she liked, but near the upstairs landing, she saw a small brown suitcase with brass corners. It looks like something from a train station, she said. The tag said $12. At home, she set it on my kitchen table and opened it. Inside were old scarves, a cracked compact mirror, and a stack of postcards from the 1960s. She was laughing at the idea of using it as apartment decor when her fingers caught on a loose seam in the lining. "Mum," she said, "there's something inside." Teachers spend years watching faces. A student who understands a hard idea for the first time. A child hiding tears. A teenager lying badly. That afternoon I watched my daughter's face change from curiosity to confusion to something near fear. She pulled out a flat oilskin envelope. My name was written on it. Nora. Not Mrs. Whittaker. Not Nora Whittaker. Just Nora, in Daniel's handwriting. For several seconds, neither of us moved. There are moments in life when the ordinary world continues, but you are no longer inside it. The refrigerator hums, a car passes outside, a dog barks down the block, and yet some unseen door has opened. I took the envelope with both hands. Inside was the letter, a small brass bank key stamped with the number 417, 3 photographs of Daniel standing beside an elderly woman I recognized only vaguely from old family albums, and 8 photocopied pages of legal documents. The first page read, Whittaker Family Residential Trust. The named beneficiaries were Daniel Whittaker, Nora Whittaker, and Elise Whittaker. The trustee listed was not Martin. It was a woman named Margaret Hale. I read the name twice. Elise whispered, "Who is Margaret Hale?" I did not know, or rather, I knew only a shadow. Daniel once mentioned a great-aunt Margaret who lived quietly and disliked the family's legal disputes. I thought she had died before I married him. The letter was dated 6 months before Daniel's death. "My dear Nora," it began. "If you are reading this, then I failed to put this directly in your hands. I am sorry. I have discovered that Martin has been moving documents and pressuring Margaret to amend the trust. She is frightened. I believe he wants the house and the account attached to it. If anything happens to me, do not trust my brother with Nora or the house." He had written my name there, as if reminding himself what he was protecting. The letter said Daniel had placed copies of the trust and related materials with Aunt Margaret's travelling case, because Martin had access to his office, our home safe, and even his email through a shared family server. I had never known about any family server. The final line was the one that broke me. "I am not afraid of losing money. I am afraid of Nora being made to believe she was never entitled to the truth." I sat down slowly. Elise began to cry first. Not loudly. Just tears falling without permission. "Mum," she said, "did Uncle Martin steal our house?" I looked at the trust pages, the signatures, the notary stamp, the date, the legal words I did not fully understand, but understood enough to fear. "I don't know," I said. That was the honest answer. And then my phone rang. Martin's name appeared on the screen. I did not answer. A minute later, a text came through. "Nora, please call me. It is important." Elise stared at the phone. How does he know? That was the question that kept me awake that night. I placed the suitcase, the letter, and every document into a plastic storage bin and slid it under my bed like a woman hiding contraband instead of her own history. Then I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, the same kind I used for lesson plans, and wrote the date at the top, October 28th. Under it, I wrote 4 columns. What I know. What I was told. What documents exist. What questions remain. That was the teacher in me. When students are overwhelmed by a complicated chapter, I tell them to make a timeline. Confusion loves darkness. Timelines turn on the light. I did not sleep much. Around 2 in the morning, I stood in the hallway outside Elise's room and listened to her breathing, the way I had when she was small and feverish. I thought about all the years I had apologized to her for what we lost. I had told her, "Your father tried his best." I had told her the house was complicated. I had told her some things are just beyond our control. But what if I had been repeating someone else's lie? Fear is strange. It does not always make you small. Sometimes fear sharpens the room. It makes every object distinct. The coffee mug, the phone charger, the old clock above the stove, the envelope on the table. I was not brave. I was careful. At 6:15 in the morning, before Elise woke, I drove to a copy shop near campus. I made 3 complete copies of everything. I paid cash, I bought a large brown envelope and wrote curriculum materials on the outside because teachers can hide almost anything in plain sight if it looks like paperwork. Then I went to school. I taught second period juniors about the progressive era, while Daniel's letter sat in my locked desk drawer. My students complained about primary source analysis, and I almost laughed. There I was, teaching them to examine evidence while my own life had become a document-based question. At lunch, I called an attorney. Not Martin. A colleague named Ruth had once gone through an ugly property dispute after her mother died. She gave me the name of her lawyer, Clara Bennett, who specialized in probate litigation and financial elder abuse. Clara's receptionist offered me an appointment 3 weeks later. I said, "I have reason to believe a trust was concealed from me for 9 years, and someone involved may currently be monitoring whether I discovered it." There was a pause. "Can you come tomorrow at 8? "Yes," I said. Then I called the bank printed on the key tag. I did not ask about accounts. I asked whether branch 417 still existed. The woman said, "That number refers to safe deposit boxes, not branches." My hand tightened around the phone. "Is box 417 active?" "I can't confirm that without identification and authorization." "Of course," I said, because I had learned something. Not much, but enough. That evening, Martin came to my house. He did not knock aggressively. He rang the bell once and stood under the porch light in a navy overcoat, holding a folder like a man arriving for a board meeting. Elise was still there. I told her to stay upstairs and record audio on her phone from the hallway. I did not know if that was legal or useful. I only knew memory could be challenged, and recordings could not forget. When I opened the door, Martin smiled. "Nora, I'm sorry to come unannounced." "It's not a good time." "I understand. I just wanted to check on you." "About what?" His eyes flicked once toward the hallway. He knew Elise was home. "I heard you may have come across some old family papers." "Heard from whom?" I wanted to ask. Instead, I said, "Old papers turn up sometimes." "They do, and often they create unnecessary distress when taken out of context." There it was, the first layer of pressure. Not anger, not denial, context. "I have an appointment with an attorney," I said. His expression did not change, but something in him became still. "Nora, that may be premature." "Maybe. Legal review is expensive, and old documents can be misleading. Drafts, unsigned copies, superseded instruments. You could spend thousands chasing a misunderstanding. I'm willing to risk a consultation." He sighed, almost tenderly. "I loved my brother too. I know grief leaves people looking for villains." That sentence entered me like cold water. A good manipulator does not accuse you first. He diagnoses you. "I'm not looking for villains," I said. "I'm looking for records." For the first time, Martin's politeness thinned. "Be careful where you take this. Reputations can be damaged by careless allegations." "Whose reputation?" "Ours," he said. "All of ours." I thanked him for stopping by, and closed the door. My hands were shaking afterward, but not while he could see them. That mattered to me. The next morning, Clara Bennett's office smelled of paper, coffee, and rain. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair cut to her jaw, and reading glasses on a chain. She did not perform sympathy. She listened. I laid out the letter, the key, the trust pages, and my timeline. She read everything slowly. Once, she stopped and went back 2 pages. Once, she looked at the notary stamp under a small magnifying glass. Finally, she said, "Nora, I'm going to ask you a few very direct questions." "All right. Did you ever sign a waiver of accounting?" "I signed many things after Daniel died. I don't know what they were." "Did Martin represent you personally?" "I thought he was helping me." "That is not the same thing." I felt my face warm with shame, but Clara did not allow it to grow. "Widows sign things under pressure every day," she said. "That is why fiduciary duties exist." She explained that if the trust was valid, someone had a duty to notify beneficiaries, provide accountings, and preserve assets. If Martin interfered with that, concealed documents, misrepresented the trust, or benefited from the sale of trust property, the matter could be civil, possibly criminal. "But first," she said, tapping Daniel's letter gently, "we do not assume, we verify." That became our rule. Do not assume, verify. Clara told me not to contact Martin directly. She instructed me to preserve every text, voicemail, envelope, tax notice, and bank letter. She had me write a detailed chronology while memories were fresh. She asked for the names of anyone connected to the old house sale: Margaret Hale, the bank, the title company, Daniel's employer, and Martin's law firm. Then she asked about the suitcase. "Where did your daughter buy it?" Elise still had the estate sale receipt. $12, paid to a company handling the estate of Margaret Hale. I stared at that receipt until the room blurred. Margaret Hale had died 3 weeks earlier. The suitcase had been hers. That answered one question and opened another. If Margaret had possessed Daniel's letter all these years, why had she never contacted me? Clara's investigator found the first concrete proof 4 days later. Margaret Hale had been alive at the time Daniel died. Not only alive, but listed as the original trustee of the Whittaker Family Residential Trust. 2 months after Daniel's death, a document had been filed removing Margaret as trustee due to incapacity and appointing Martin as successor trustee. Attached was a physician's letter. Clara frowned when she saw the doctor's name. "What is it?" I asked. This physician was disciplined by the State Medical Board 5 years ago for signing capacity letters without adequate examination. The foundation shifted again. "If Margaret was incapacitated," Clara said, "we need medical records. If she was not, the trustee change may be vulnerable." Then came the deed history. The old house had not been sold to pay family debts. It had been transferred from the trust to a limited liability company called Red Lantern Holdings, then sold 18 months later for nearly twice the amount listed in the documents Martin showed me. Red Lantern Holdings had one managing member, Martin's wife. I remember sitting across from Clara, watching her slide the paper toward me, and feeling something inside me go very quiet. Not rage. Rage is hot and noisy. This was different. It was the feeling of a teacher finding the answer key in a locked drawer after being told for years the test had been lost. Clara said, "This is significant." I looked at the company address. It was Martin's office building. "He didn't just take it," I said. "He made me thank him for taking it." Clara's eyes softened. "Yes," she said, "that appears to be part of it." The pressure began the next day. First, Martin called. I did not answer. Then his assistant emailed, saying Martin wanted to resolve any family confusion in a way that protected Daniel's memory. Then my sister-in-law, Vivian, left a voicemail. "Nora, I know you're upset, but dragging this through lawyers will only hurt Elise. Martin has always tried to protect you. Please don't let some old woman's papers poison the family." Some old woman. Margaret had been reduced to an inconvenience. Then an unfamiliar number called the school office and asked for me during class. The secretary said the man refused to leave a message. That afternoon, my principal mentioned gently that a family legal matter should not interfere with my work. I knew then Martin had reached beyond the family. That frightened me more than the documents. A villain who shouts is easy to identify. A villain who calls your workplace with concern in his voice is harder to explain. Clara responded by sending formal preservation letters to Martin, his law firm, the bank, the title company, Red Lantern Holdings, and the estate sale company. She warned them not to destroy communications, drafts, emails, ledgers, trust records, closing documents, or safe deposit access logs. "Now," she said, "if anything disappears, that disappearance becomes evidence too." That was a lesson I wished I had taught every student. Sometimes the missing page tells you where to look. The safe deposit box required a court petition. Martin opposed it, claiming the key was stolen or improperly obtained, which was a strange accusation to make about a key found in a dead woman's suitcase at a public estate sale. Clara filed the receipt, photographs, and affidavits from Elise and me. The judge granted limited access with both attorneys present. I will never forget the bank lobby that morning. Polished floors, soft chairs, a bowl of peppermints near the reception desk. Ordinary places become cinematic when your life is waiting behind a locked door. Martin was there in a grey suit, speaking quietly with his attorney. He nodded at me, as if we were attending a school board meeting. Nora, Martin, that was all. The bank officer led us into a small viewing room. Box 417 was longer than I expected. She placed it on the table and stepped back. Clara opened it. Inside were 3 bundles. The first contained original trust documents. The second contained account statements dating back 12 years. The third contained letters from Margaret to Daniel, and later, letters from Margaret to me that had never reached me. My hands went cold. Clara lifted one envelope. It was addressed in shaky handwriting to my old house. Return to sender was stamped across the front. Another had been forwarded to Martin's office. Another had been opened. The letter inside began, "Dear Nora, I fear Daniel was right." I had to sit down. Margaret had tried to contact me, more than once. She wrote that Martin was pressuring her to sign papers she did not understand. She wrote that Daniel had asked her to protect Elise's interest in the house if anything happened to him. She wrote that she was afraid of being declared incompetent. And then, in the final letter, dated 1 month after Daniel died, she wrote, "If Martin tells you there is no trust, he is lying. The truth has a weight of its own. It sits in the room with everyone." Even Martin stopped moving. Clara quietly asked the bank officer to copy and certify the contents. Martin's attorney objected to nearly everything, but objection is not erasure. The papers were there, the dates were there, Margaret's warnings were there. That afternoon, Clara filed a civil complaint. The claims included breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, conversion, concealment, tortious interference, and unjust enrichment. She also requested an emergency injunction freezing proceeds related to the old house sale and any remaining trust accounts. The court battle did not happen like television. There was no single dramatic day where someone jumped up and confessed. Real legal battles are slower. They are fought in motions, subpoenas, account statements, emails, and depositions where people are asked the same question 3 different ways until the truth grows tired of hiding. Discovery uncovered the first email. It was from Martin to the doctor who signed Margaret's incapacity letter. Need language supporting inability to manage complex financial affairs, family trust issue, time sensitive. The doctor replied, "I can prepare something general based on your summary." Based on your summary. Margaret had not been examined. The second email was worse. Martin wrote to a title company contact. "Widow is emotionally overwhelmed and unlikely to contest. Need clean transfer from trust to LLC before listing." I read that sentence in Clara's office and felt my breath leave me. Widow is emotionally overwhelmed. He had not misunderstood my grief. He had used it as a tool. In class, when we study propaganda, I tell my students that language can make cruelty look administrative, displacement, collateral damage, necessary action. Martin's phrase did the same thing. It turned a grieving woman and her child into a manageable obstacle. Then came the bank records. The trust had contained not only the house, but an investment account created by Daniel's grandfather for maintenance, taxes, education, and beneficiary support. At the time of Daniel's death, it held a little over $640,000. By the time Clara obtained the accounting, nearly all of it had moved through legal fees, management fees, consulting fees, property expenses, and loans to entities connected to Martin. Elise could have gone to college without loans, I whispered. Clara said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, that was the loss that hurt most. Not the number, the years of unnecessary fear, the choices we made because we thought there was no cushion, the dental work delayed. The summer programs Elise skipped, the nights I lay awake calculating rent and tuition, while money meant for us, travelled politely through Martin's companies. The deposition was scheduled for March. By then, Martin's side had offered settlement twice. The first offer was insulting, wrapped in concern, a modest payment in exchange for confidentiality and a full release. The second was larger, but still required silence. Clara asked what I wanted. "I want Elise protected," I said. "I want the record corrected. And I want him unable to do this to anyone else. That may mean less privacy. I know. Depositions are unpleasant. I teach teenagers," I said. "I can sit through unpleasant." She smiled for the first time. Martin's deposition took place in a conference room on the 19th floor of a downtown building. The windows looked out over the city in winter light. A court reporter sat at the end of the table. Martin placed his hands calmly in front of him. He looked rested. Clara began gently. "Mr. Whittaker, when did you first become aware of the Whittaker Family Residential Trust?" "I don't recall the exact date." Was it before or after your brother's death? I believe before. Did you inform Nora Whittaker that she and her daughter were named beneficiaries? To the best of my recollection, the operative documents did not establish enforceable beneficiary rights. Clara slid the original trust across the table. Please identify this document. Martin adjusted his glasses. It appears to be a trust instrument. Is that Daniel Whittaker's signature? It appears to be. Is that Margaret Hale's signature accepting trusteeship? It appears to be. And are Nora and Elise Whittaker listed as beneficiaries? His attorney objected. Clara waited. Martin said, "Their names appear." Not yes. Their names appear. Polite men hide in grammar. Then Clara showed him Margaret's letters, the returned envelopes, the forwarded mail, the email about the widow being emotionally overwhelmed. For the first time, Martin's mouth tightened. "Do you deny writing this email?" Clara asked. "No. What did you mean by unlikely to contest?" "I meant Nora was not in a position to engage in protracted litigation, because she was grieving, because she had limited resources." "And who told her she had limited resources?" The room went still. Martin did not answer immediately. Clara repeated the question. "Who told Nora Whittaker she had limited resources?" Martin said, "I provided information based on my understanding at the time." That was when Clara opened the accounting. She moved through each transfer: trustee fee, legal fee, consulting payment, LLC loan, property management expense. Every number had a date. Every date had a document. Every document narrowed the room around him. I watched quietly. I did not speak. I did not cry. I did not accuse. That was not my role that day. My role was to sit there as the person he thought would never survive the paper trail. The strongest moment came from a small thing. Clara produced a school tuition invoice from Elise's senior year. I had emailed Martin back then, asking whether any family education fund existed, because Elise had been accepted into a summer environmental program. Martin replied, "I am sorry, Nora. There are no funds available for that purpose." On the same day, trust records showed a $38,000 payment to Martin's firm for beneficiary consultation. Clara asked, "Who was the beneficiary consulted?" Martin looked at the paper. "I would need to review the file." "You are under oath. Was Nora consulted?" "I don't recall." "Was Elise consulted?" "I don't recall." "Was Margaret Hale consulted?" "No. So the trust paid your firm for beneficiary consultation, but you cannot identify a beneficiary who was consulted." His attorney objected again. But the sentence had already landed. The case did not go to a full trial. Most cases like ours do not. Once the deposition transcripts, bank records, emails, and medical letter issues became clear, Martin's insurance carrier entered negotiations. The probate court removed him from any remaining fiduciary role. A neutral professional trustee was appointed. The sale of the old house could not be undone because it had passed to a later buyer without knowledge of the fraud, but the proceeds were traced. Some had been spent. Some had been hidden badly. Some had been converted into investments under different company names. Forensic accountants are historians of money. They follow numbers the way I teach students to follow sources. Who created this? Where did it go? Who benefited? What changed after? In the end, Elise and I received a settlement large enough to repay her loans, secure my retirement, and purchase a modest home outright. Not the old Whittaker house. I thought that would hurt forever, but it did not. A stolen house carries echoes. I wanted walls that did not know Martin's footsteps. Martin resigned from his firm before disciplinary proceedings became public. The state bar opened an investigation. The county prosecutor reviewed the forged and misleading filings connected to Margaret's incapacity letter. I will not pretend every consequence was as dramatic as people might want. White-collar wrongdoing often exits through side doors, but he lost the thing he protected most carefully: his reputation. Vivian sent one handwritten note months later. It said, "I did not know all of it. I believed her, partly. People often choose not to know what keeps them comfortable." I did not respond. Margaret Hale's estate had very little left, but Clara helped me obtain copies of her remaining letters and a photograph from the estate sale company. In it, Margaret sat in a garden chair wearing a pale blue sweater, her hands folded neatly in her lap, looking directly at the camera with the expression of a woman who had seen through many people and forgiven very few. I framed that photograph. Elise asked why. Because she tried, I said. And because sometimes justice arrives late wearing the face of someone who refused to throw away a suitcase. The first thing I bought after everything was settled was not jewelry, not a car, not anything anyone could admire from the street. I bought a kitchen table. Solid oak, round, big enough for Elise, for papers, for coffee cups, for future grandchildren, if life gives me that blessing one day. I bought a small house 30 minutes from my school, with a garden bed along the back fence, and a maple tree young enough to grow with me. The day I moved in, Elise brought the $12 suitcase and placed it on a shelf in my study. Too creepy? She asked. No, I said. It earned its place. I still teach history. I still grade essays in the evenings. But I teach primary sources differently now. When my students groan about documents, I tell them, a document can change a life. They think I am exaggerating. I am not. I also teach them that calm is not the same as weakness, that asking for records is not rude, that polite language can hide ugly intentions, that grief should never be mistaken for consent. For years, I believed losing the house was the tragedy. I understand now that the deeper wound was being trained to doubt my own right to ask questions. Martin did not only take property. He took confidence. He took history. He took the clean memory of my husband and covered it with paperwork. Getting the money back mattered. Of course it mattered. Anyone who says money does not matter has never counted grocery items at the register while pretending not to be scared. But money was not the real ending. The real ending was the first morning I woke in my new house, made coffee, opened the back door, and stepped into my little garden with bare feet in the grass. There was no dread in my chest. No hidden bill on the counter. No powerful relative deciding what I deserved to know. Just air. Just sunlight. Just quiet. Elise graduated with honors. She works now for a non-profit that restores urban green spaces. Sometimes she jokes that she inherited Daniel's love of structures and my obsession with evidence. She still has student loans marked paid in a folder because she says she likes looking at the word paid. I understand that. There are words you survive toward. Safe, free, paid, home. I visited Daniel's grave after the settlement was finalized. I brought a copy of the court order and one of Margaret's letters. That may sound strange, but grief has its own rituals. I sat on the damp grass and told him what had happened. I told him Elise was all right. I told him I was sorry I had believed Martin. Then I stopped myself, because that was the last lesson. The shame was never mine. A woman in shock trusted someone who had trained his whole life to sound trustworthy. That is not foolishness. That is betrayal. Before I left, I touched Daniel's name on the stone and said, "We found it." I meant the letter. I meant the truth. I meant myself. So if you are listening to this and there is some document you have been afraid to request, some account you were told not to question, some family story that only benefits the person who keeps repeating it, I want you to remember this. You do not have to be loud to be strong. You do not have to be cruel to be firm. You do not have to understand everything before you begin. Start with one folder, one timeline, one phone call to someone who does not benefit from your silence. The truth has a weight of its own, but it also has a direction. Once it begins moving, even powerful people have to step aside or be carried with it. My daughter bought an old suitcase for $12. Inside was the letter that destroyed the version of our family I had been forced to believe. But it also rebuilt something better. Not the old house, not the old life, me. And now I want to ask you, dear listeners, what would you have done if you found that letter at your kitchen table? Would you have confronted him right away, or would you have stayed quiet and gathered evidence? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reached something in your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes one story gives another person the courage to open the drawer they have been avoiding.